I welcome everyone for this brief talk and brief sharing session, actually, on some aspects of academic publishing. We started the last session talking about some metrics about publication. Today, we focus more on the writing process. So actually, this is the second session of the Coffee Hour series for 2022 from the Energy Sphere. So just a quick brief on the Energy Sphere is an office space, and it is one unit in the University of Tenaga National. So this Energy Sphere is an office space that encompasses some labs, meeting rooms, and discussion rooms, and it offers a lot of services, including training, and also it is available for renting for example, special workshops, some meetings, and there are a lot of facilities inside this Energy Sphere. I am working at the IoT Planet Lab. This is the name of a specific lab within the Energy Sphere. My name is Ahmed Mubarak. I'm also a senior lecturer in the University of Tenaga Nasional. And for this talk, we will keep it short. Hopefully, it will be short and sweet. So we'll talk about writing for academic publishing. And we will not elaborate too much because we have just 1 hour, and we will try to make it as short as possible. So if we are good enough, we can have even can spare some time for discussion and Q&A. But it will continue from where we left off last time, talking about metrics for publication and the nature of the research process. So it will be just short notes, mostly recommendations and some advice I have collected over the years and from various resources. Most of these resources are senior academicians and professional writers. So let's review very quickly the agenda for today. Please feel free to interrupt if you have anything urgent, but we will spare some time, hopefully, at the end for questions and answers and discussions and any other feedback. Like, for example, you might have some additions or comments. So I just have to highlight that the main focus of this talk is for students, especially postgrad students and beginning researchers like myself. So the more senior one might find a lot of things that are boring, but please bear with me. Thank you for your attendance and thank you for attention. And thank you for your additions if you have added anything. So for today, we will just make sure first that we put things in perspective. So we will review the big picture we displayed last time just to review and very quickly recap the whole process and see where does writing fit. Then we'll skip the what and how because we assume we have talked about that last time. And we'll just move into when to write. Then some tips that things you should do before writing. And we'll have some tactics and tips for the writing process itself. And to just complete the picture, we will talk briefly about the parts of a manuscript. So these are the different sections in a paper, but we'll keep this very short because other resources have already covered that extensively. And finally, we will just finish with final words of advice and recommendations again. So for the big picture, hopefully you remember this from the last time. So we are here for academic publishing. And so we assume that the context of this series is for academicians, for postgrad students and researchers working in academia. So in that context, it's all about knowledge. Research in this context is defined by contribution to the body of knowledge. So knowledge there are many different disciplines, many different fields. Within each field, so if you think about the context of your field, there is a body of knowledge, a lot of knowledge that have been produced, the heritage of the humanity in a specific field over the centuries or decades, or, it depends on the field. So it all starts with knowledge and also ends with knowledge. Yeah, the researcher starts from knowing the body of knowledge in his or her field, then the ultimate goal is to add back to this body of knowledge. So how a researcher becomes a researcher? Through a formal training, and it is long training. Probably you are undertaking these things. For example, the master degree, the PhD degree are just part of the formal training. And then the researcher should produce new knowledge, usually by doing some research. And in parallel with that, they will do some writing, and the writing will produce a manuscript. So the new knowledge will be delivered in a form of a manuscript. And there are two parts of the manuscript: the style and the content. The content is the king, the style is very important. And then this manuscript is hopefully to be disseminated through some publication venue. But we have to filter these manuscripts. So the researcher has to submit the manuscript, and the manuscript has to go through the process of this called publishing process. It includes review process and production. Then it will go, if it is successful, it will go through into the publication venue. And publications are actually supervised by publishers. We talked last time about the publisher, about publishing, a little bit about publications, especially the publications in terms of metrics, how we measure the quality of publication. And we will ignore this publishing process. It has been covered by so many resources. So today we will focus just on this part about writing, and we'll talk a little bit about the manuscript. So that's the big picture. And then we will switch to a question. We will not talk about why, we will not talk about what, because I assume from this big picture and from our talk last time, the previous session, we already elaborated on what you are doing, what you are publishing in a manuscript, and why. But today we will focus on the when and the how a little bit. So when to write, let's focus on this question first. There are two schools of thought. So there are two approaches, actually. The first approach is a traditional one. This is a classic approach, is that you write after completing the work, after confirming the results. So this is a traditional approach. It's based on the scientific method. So this is a very traditional model, and it is inherited from the scientific method. And to the right, you can see this. This is just a quick depiction of the scientific method, the steps. So usually you start with an observation or a question or a problem. You are assigned a problem, you suffer from a problem, or you observe something strange. And then what you do usually, you collect information about this problem or learn more about these observations. Essentially, one of your main resources would be the literature, the academic literature. So you have to research. This is the word we are using, specific word for searching the academic literature. So we call that research. So you have to immerse yourself in the literature and learn as much as possible about that question or that observation. Then you will, after immersing yourself with this problem, probably you will come up with some kind of an idea for a solution, or an idea for some conceptual framework for that observation. Probably you will produce a model out of those observations, or you will do something else. So this is called usually hypothesis. You establish a hypothesis, you assume some solution, or you assume some answer for that question. If you are coming from engineering or IT, as most probably you are, you can think of the question as a problem statement, and you can think of the hypothesis as the set of objectives. So actually in engineering, if we have a problem, our solution are formulated in terms of objectives. There are steps. If you accomplish those objectives, then you answer the question or you solve the problem. And then comes the test and experimentation. It depends. So you go through some method. So you are using some method to move from the hypothesis into the results. So if you are working in, for example, social sciences or natural sciences or medical sciences, for example, you will collect a lot of data. You will analyze those data using, for example, statistical analysis. If available, you can do experimentation so that you can produce some kind of causation instead of just observations and correlation. So you can do some experimentation, you can analyze your data, produce results, and finally comes reporting the conclusions. So this step of reporting is where writing fits. That's a classic way of doing a scientific method research, and that's the final stage where you write your findings. So this is the way most of us follow, at least in the beginning. And this is most common advice you will face, most probably, at least the classical advice. It will assume this method. So you start writing usually the method, this type of things, then the results, then finally you move into the beginning. You write the introduction, you write the abstract, you write the conclusion. This is just a traditional way. It's not necessarily in this order, but it's always easier to start with something you know, because usually you do the work, so you know what method you have followed, you know your results, then you can formulate everything. So you can write the introduction and you can summarize everything at the end. There is another school of thought, another approach, is that you write in parallel with doing research. And this is very interesting idea because writing here is actually considered as part of the work. It's not just the final stage. So writing is a main driving forces here. So it drives the work. It organizes your ideas. It directs the research. So you start writing from the beginning. Whenever you are laying out the design of your research, you are writing that up. Sometimes you even start with a temporary draft, and that draft is like that layout you will try. This is a blueprint. Your focus will be in filling up the gaps, filling up the blank in that blueprint. So it helps. Writing helps clarifying the ideas before even starting doing research. So this is a very interesting idea, and I encourage everyone to try this one. So you start writing from day one. Whenever you have observation or a question in mind or a problem that is assigned to you, you write that up and you start writing the hypotheses, the objectives, whatever you find in the literature. You write even an initial draft. You write your perception of what you will be the final manuscript, and that hopefully will help you driving yourself into the work. So there is another benefit of this approach, which documenting the work while at work. So usually the small details are forgotten, but if you are writing in parallel with doing the research, it's most probably you will avoid this pitfall. And perhaps one of the best resources on this approach, I found this many years ago, is a YouTube lecture. You can find it on YouTube. So I just display it for you here. Writing's not that easy. Okay, bear with this announcement a little bit. So sorry. This is how to write a great research paper. So from a researcher at Microsoft. It's an old one, actually, but it was published here in 2016. Please have a look at this one. If you are interested in that approach, have a look at this lecture. It's very interesting. And this guy elaborates on the approach in this talk. And probably, if you find it useful, you will stick with that. And this is just a paper talking about the same thing. So that's about when. Before writing, also, there are things you have to think of. There are things you have to go through. So first of all, let's just clarify and make explicit our assumptions. Always, we suffer from hidden assumptions. So let me just make this straight and make explicit an assumption that we should agree on. Without this assumption, whatever we are saying is actually pointless. So we should assume here, and please focus on this and just keep this in your mind and always remember this. We always assume whenever we talk about writing tips, whatever, that what you want to write is publishable. So the content is good, the findings are valuable, there's something to publish. Otherwise, nothing will compensate for poor content. So the new, important, original content, these are the main elements of any publishable piece of research. It should be new, especially if we talk about publishing in good or top tier journals, especially if you are at a stage where you are supposed to produce new knowledge. This is the traditional definition of research, producing new knowledge. And it should be important, so it's not trivial, and it should be original, so it was produced by you. And only then can we think about how to best communicate this content in a form of a paper or article or whatever. So if you want your manuscript to be accepted, even before you write, it must meet two conditions. The first one, again, the content should be good. The second one, the presentation of the content should be good. So these are two aspects of a good manuscript. You have to keep that in mind. And even before you start, when you think about your research, when you start thinking about the problem, about the question, when you start making observations, even before you read the literature, you have to follow these things. Please write down your thoughts. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until it is forgotten. Even using voice. Nowadays, there are no short of tools. We are not short of tools of different kinds. There are even apps to record your thoughts. You can use a pen and paper. You can use your laptop. You can use any digital form, even the voice. This will help you after that writing the manuscript when you have forgotten most of your thoughts. Thoughts are forgotten all the time. You always have good ideas, but you always tend to forget the good ideas, and that's natural. So to just keep this as you know, to avoid this problem as much as possible, always document your thoughts. Likewise, as you read papers later on during the literature review, please try to highlight the parts that are most interesting. So don't forget to highlight, at least to highlight. You can write them down, you can jog the ideas somewhere else. You can have a filing system that documents the main ideas, the main comments, the main questions you have on different papers you read on some external system. That would be good. So another aspect before you're writing anything is to select the target journal. So there is a benefit of identifying the target journal. So what journal you want to publish your work in. One benefit is fulfilling the requirements from the beginning. Each journal has its own requirements. So if you are aware of those requirements from the start, probably you will not suffer at the end. So it will be just an easy conclusion. And another benefit is that you can make use of the previously published samples. So if you are targeting a specific journal, you will find published articles in that journal. So you have free samples. So you can see what are the publishable items look like. And then you can imitate that as much as possible. So let's move on to some tactics and tips to write. These are more about, tips about the mechanics of writing. And we'll start with something on style and then something on strategy. I'm not talking about the content here because I'm assuming that the content is good already, as I have said here. So the content should be new, important, original, and original. These are subject of other talks, so we cannot fit this in our discussion here. So that's why I will just focus on the style and the strategy of writing the content. So mostly on presentation. So for style, there are very quick tips. So please try to follow this as much as possible. These are usually what you will hear from professional writers, novelists, researchers, the good ones. So first of all, whenever you write, as much as possible, it's always better to use short and focused phrases. So your sentences should be short as much as possible, but complete. And if they are short, they will be focused. Usually, if the sentences are very long, this means they lack some focus. They are not focusing on a single point, which is not good. And usually, one paragraph should fit one idea. So one paragraph or one idea. If you have two ideas, make them in two paragraphs. The idea could be, for example, some example, could be some argument, could be a one aspect of an argument. So if it is one idea, it fits in one paragraph, that's okay. It doesn't fit in one paragraph, you can split it up into two or more paragraphs. But as much as possible, don't put two ideas in one paragraph. And whenever you can, whenever possible, use active voice. It's better than passive voice. And this is very key aspect. This is very important advice here. One of the key secrets of any professional writer is just to remove any repetitions. So one of the most important aspects of the editing process that any good author goes through is to remove the repetitions. The repetitions could be in words, could be in sentences, could be in ideas, could be in sections sometimes. And any redundancy. If something is not adding anything new, you just remove it, cut it off. That's it. That's one of the professional, very important professional advice for writing. And always choose simple words. This is very important, although most of us in the beginning tend to use complicated words because we feel that if we choose simple words, we will look like simple people. But that's not correct actually. Most of the time, if you use simple words, you will get your message across to the other person. If you are not using simple words, this means one of two things or three things. Either you lack the vocabulary, you don't know enough words, so your tools are not very sharp, or you don't know what you are talking about, or most probably you are also paraphrasing and just using some dictionary for synonyms. And all of these assumptions are not very good for the reader. And believe me, any reader, even the layman, can sense all of these things. So please choose simple words as much as possible. This is much better than the jargon or the complicated words. And pay special attention to the first and last sentence of each paragraph. These are the key sentences in a paragraph. You start pulling the attention of the reader in a paragraph with the first sentence, and you say goodbye to the reader at the end of the paragraph with the last sentence. So you want to have a good first impression, and you want to leave a good last impression. Write as you are explaining on the board. That's one of the secrets for clear writing. Just imagine yourself explaining something to a friend or student or a colleague on the whiteboard, for example. So usually on the whiteboard, you will feel free, and you will follow every possible approach to just get your message across. But when we write, we tend to ignore this actually approach, and we tend to usually use more complicated words. Our explanations will be a lot of like formal jargon that's very difficult to absorb, really. But just imagine you are explaining something on the board and write it down. That will be good. Make it look like a story as much as possible. That's an art, but good people can make anything, even the most heavily technical jargon, they can make it look like a story. People like stories, and stories get across all the time. Keep the flow of the speech. That's an art, but you will get better when you read more and more. So your speech, your talk should be flowing smoothly from a word to a word, a sentence to a sentence, paragraph to a paragraph, and section to a section. And finally, use metaphors and examples. That's very important thing. Whenever you have analogies, you use them. That's a very powerful tool for explanation. So that's about the style. Just few tips. What about strategy? Strategy is as much important as the style and anything else. So strategy is the general approach, the overall approach for writing. So this is your plan for writing even before you start. It is advised that you start with an outline. So please put an outline for the paper before writing the details. That will help you. It is not very typical for professional writers to just start from the top to the bottom, filling all the details, all the way through to the end. That's really not typical. Most of the professional writers, they don't do that. Usually, they start with an outline. Outlines means the sections, so the main points, the main sections and subsections, and then with time they fill the blanks. And most of the time also, this is in no specific order. So you don't have to go from the top to the bottom. Sometimes you have some material for a section on the methods, for example, or you have some ideas for the discussion. It is fresh in your mind. You have just discussed this with a friend or a colleague. So these are fresh in your mind. Put them in their place. If you have an outline, if you have your subsections in place, then you know where to put this discussion, these ideas. Put them down. Then later on, when you are in a good mood, for example, to add some introduction, you add the introduction in its place. When you find some piece of work in the literature and you find that that deserves to be put in your paper, put it in its own section, which you will find in your outline. So this is a general strategy which is very useful, and it's also very useful to set a writing schedule. and to stick to it if possible. That's very difficult in nowadays in our tight schedules, but professional writers do that all the time. So usually they will have a schedule. For example, 2 hours of writing in the early morning, or for example, 5 hours per week. Sometimes they do 3 days per week. Sometimes is a daily schedule. For example, half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours. It depends on your activities, on your schedule, on your lifestyle. But as much as possible, if there is a system, if there is a schedule, then try to stick to it, because this will establish a routine. So it will become a habit, and writing will become less cumbersome. And then write without editing first. That's a very good advice. And most professional writers, they say this. So if you listen to professional writers, you will hear them say this all the time. When you write, just write. Don't edit. Don't monitor yourself. Later on, you will review and revise continuously. So now just let's take a quick tour on the sections of a manuscript or the sections of a paper. This will be very quick because I believe this have been covered by many other talks, and there are many good resources. You can refer to that. But probably to just complete the picture and make this talk as as much complete as possible within at least within this 45, 60 minutes. Let's talk about the parts of a manuscript. Few ideas here. So first of all, generally, if we talk about the manuscript structure, just remember this first. The paper components, they vary between disciplines and between article types. So you cannot just refer to a single paper or two papers or few samples and you want to stick to it, whatever. It doesn't work like that. So different disciplines, you will have different components, different styles, different formats, sometimes even different types of the articles within the same discipline. So there is like a room of innovation a little bit for academic publishing. There are some established standard way to do it, especially here. I'll talk about that later on. But always there is a room. Always remember, you are not bound, you are not tied to follow this literally. Always there are a space for innovation and creativity. So always think of the idea you want to communicate, because it's all about the idea. It's all about the message. It's not about the details. It's not about how sophisticated you look like. It's not about how complicated it looks like. It's about the message. If it gets across, then this is a successful piece of manuscript. Don't ignore the journal's requirements. That's very important. So please read the instructions, the author guidelines, and also clearly state what is new and what's important in the paper. This is generally general advice. Wherever you fit that, wherever you put that in the paper, in the manuscript, you make it explicit and you make it clear. Don't leave that to the reader to guess. Don't leave the readers to guess what is introduced in this paper, what is the contribution of this paper. That's not a good thing to do as an author. So generally, if we talk about the structure of a manuscript in science, we will find this layout, which is usually abbreviated as IMRAD. IMRAD is just an acronym of introduction and methods, results for R. A is just for and then the discussion. So these are the main components. Any reader in academic circles will expect to find these, at least to find this in a manuscript. So we'll talk a little bit briefly about each one of them, briefly, but these are the general outline. But again, please be aware of possible alternatives. There is a room for creativity, a room for change from time to time. And then if there is time at the end, we can refer to some examples. So for the main parts of the manuscript, before the introduction, of course, you have to have a title and abstract. The title should draw attention and summarize the core of the paper in as few words as possible. That's the key point here. The title should be short as much as possible, but complete. So you can, if you cannot deliver, or you cannot reveal or convey the core of the paper in one line, then it's okay. Move to the next line. But if you can fit it in one line or half a line, then please do that. And most often it is possible, most often than most of us think. So it's an art, but it's an important art because this is the main attraction to your paper. The title can be separated into two parts. For example, you can say this is about so and so, using, for example, so and so, or you can put some main title, then a colon, then some further explanation. It's a common convention, a common approach in titles in academia. But it's important to avoid provocative words, words that makes reviewers and readers, itchy or angry sometimes. For example, you claiming of novelty, claiming of new things, claiming of breakthroughs. That's provocative. Uh, be safe as much as possible. Use a temporary title. If this is one approach, if you cannot think of a title from the beginning, you can just use a temporary title. Then you can change it at the end if needed. So you don't have to stick with the title from the beginning. You can just have a rough title, then you can complete. And if that title still fits all the components, then that's okay. If not, you can change it. For the abstract, this is a very important piece of the paper. This is your biggest opportunity to market the paper. So you sell your work using the abstract. Most of the people will read only the abstract. Most of the people, indeed, literally, if any. And whoever is looking for something will read the abstract. If I am searching the literature for something, I will read first all the abstracts. So these are the main source of, for selling the paper. So please make their task easy. Make it easy for them to find the core of the paper from the abstract. The abstract generally reflects the content of the paper, and it should be independent from the rest of the paper. And usually all the components in the abstract will reflect the paper's components. So it will reflect the components in the paper. So I mean by that, that you will find in the abstract, whether within the lines, sometimes it is explicit, sometimes it is just within the lines. You will find some kind of introduction, you will find some kind of method, you will find some kind of results and conclusion. So you should find that those components in the abstract somehow. Where exactly, how they are structured, it's up to you. You are a writer, and there is a room for innovation. But at least we can find those components inside the abstract, because this is the complete picture of a paper. This will help me decide whether I should read the paper or not. And the abstract uh, should be possible to read without the rest of the paper, and vice versa. So also I can read the paper without the abstract, it should be complete. And also I can read the abstract without the paper. So the abstract here is independent of the rest of the paper. For the introduction, just a couple of lines. So I refer you to other sources and resources. So you'll find a lot of talks about different strategies, different ideas, different mechanisms of writing the introduction, but just a couple of ideas here. So first, introduction, these are the main components of any good introduction. Very quickly, you should define the context. So what we are talking about, where are we? What's this? What's the field? What's the problem we are talking? What's the context means? It is moving even before the problem. What field we are talking about? What is the circumstances? What moves us in this direction? So I will move into the motivation for my problem. Then I have to state the problem. And then I have to indicate what is the solution without much details. So the details will be kept to the methods and results, but I should make the reader very clear about what's the problem and what is my solution from the introduction. So if they want to stop here, they can stop with enough information. If they want to continue because they are interested in the solution, they can continue. Usually the solution will be either the hypothesis in some disciplines. In engineering, we usually call them the objective of the paper. And of course, in the paper, this will fit in a single section. In a thesis, for example, this will fit in a chapter. So there will be in chapter 1, there will be a section for the motivation, a section for problem statements, section for objectives, and so on and forth. So by the end of the introduction, that's the main point. The reader should know the problem. Why is it important? Or why is it difficult? Because if it's not important, you shouldn't write about it. If it's not difficult, trivial, you shouldn't write about it. and they should know the proposed solution without details. That's the introduction. Then for the related works, this is sometimes called the literature review, if you have any. Some papers, short ones, like, for example, letters, you might find the literature review or the related works embedded inside the introduction. That's very common. It's okay. If you have an explicit section for the related works, just keep these points in mind very quickly. If there is a related work section, organize it into subsections. It is possible. It's not necessarily that all the works go into a single paragraph or a single section. But please choose the most important and relevant resources, papers, and cite those. And put your work in perspective. So show where your work fits in the landscape of other works. And don't try to cover every work in the field. You will not be able to do that, of course. So selection of the most important and relevant is very important, especially in a paper that is not a review paper by itself. But that doesn't mean that you just ignore the papers in your field. You should know your field. Your selection reflects your expertise in your field. So whether you are writing a section of a paper or an entire review paper, don't forget that one selection is a piece of one's mind. So your selection of the references you put in your paper is a very strong indicator, very strong signal of what is your expertise in this field. And make friends with other researchers. This is another way to say cite other researchers. For the method, this section usually describes how the results were produced, and it depends on the type of the result. It varies from one field to another, of course. Some types of work, the method will be just statistical analysis, data gathering. Some will be some building of prototypes, building of software. Some will be experimentation, some will be simulation. It depends on the type of the work. But it is the means by which we move from the objective or the hypothesis into the results. And if the method is the new knowledge itself, if your contribution actually is the method, okay, then expand on the presentation of the method. But if the method is just a standard method, you used the method which is a standard in the literature just to produce the results, then you can just refer to it with references. The method can be divided into sections as well as needed if the technical details are substantial, or if the methods are, the core of the contribution, then you just feel free to divide it into subsections. It's okay. And it's important to include sufficient details. This is an important aspect of the methods section. The methods section, one of the main goals of the methods section is to make your work reproducible. So it should include enough details to reproduce the work by experts in the same field. And also, this will allow others to verify and to validate your work. So the goal here is to reveal the knowledge, not to conceal the knowledge. So please explain as much as possible, clear, explicit. You don't have to hide anything. Otherwise, you can consider just filing a patent or an intellectual property if you want to hide some details. And don't forget to mention why you choose that, what you choose. So what is the reason you have selected this particular method to solve the problem or to produce the results. For the results, they don't explain themselves. So please explain them. It's not just enough to present the results. Discuss them and explain them. Make them clear and make the conclusion later on very sound. Ensure that each claim in the introduction is supported by evidence from the results. And use figures and tables generously, and also be generous with captions with figures and tables. That's very important. Most of us forget to do that. Don't talk here about the importance of the problem. That went already in the introduction and abstract. But talk about the meaning and importance of the results in this section. And you can also compare the results with what it should be, what is the expected result, or with the results of other papers. And then you show how the generated knowledge fits in the existing body of knowledge. For the conclusion, it is just a summary of the most important results, but without repeating the abstract. So the abstract serves its purpose. Now in the conclusion, you reiterate on the main findings without repeating yourself. And it should also,
Hello?
yeah, sorry? Any question? Anything? Anything wrong?
Yeah, I heard someone says hello.
Okay, probably just a test.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, we said that the conclusion should refer back to the beginning. So you should connect the end, which is the conclusion, to the beginning. So whenever I read the abstract or the introduction, I should have some pointer from the conclusion back to my claims in the introduction. And the conclusion also highlights the most important consequences of the work and any recommendations based on this work, sometimes called future work. And please don't mention the obvious. If something is obvious, very obvious from the results, you don't have to explicitly mention it in the conclusion. It will just look like very redundant, and it will look like you just want to fill some gap. For the references, please list all the references you have cited, all of them, but no more. So don't list in the bibliography at the end, in the references section, don't list things you didn't cite. And also don't cite anything but the good. That's a very important aspect. Don't add citations after you have already finished. So it's not the place to help other researchers by citing just their works after you finish your work. If you need to cite something, cite it and then list it in the references. If not, then don't do that. So final words, final advice and recommendations. Very quickly, I hope this will be very useful. Actually, these are uh, collected from many resources. It's short, but please, I encourage you to think about each one separately later on and reflect on this advice. You might resonate with some of them, and they are all from professional writers and senior academicians again. So first, in order to write, please read first. Um, every writer is a reader, but not the other way around. So it's not necessary that every reader will be a good writer, but every good writer should be a good reader first. And in order to write the good, that's important, read for the good. Don't read anything. Please don't read anything. Uh, you will produce, you will get an output from what input you have. So remember, your output will reflect your input. Be selective about the input, your output will be good. And reading develops your vocabulary. So you cannot just describe a situation, whatever the situation is, unless you have the words to do so. So if you want to describe an experiment, you want to describe an idea, you don't have enough vocabulary, you will be short of that. And when you read for the content and for the form. So you don't observe only the idea, but you observe the style, how the senior researchers deliver their idea. And don't think of the paper as a complex combination of technical details and heavy phrases. No, think of this as most simply, think of it as an idea you want to inject into the reader's mind. So just think about the message, and then your task will be easy. And remember that you cannot do this, you cannot just think of it as a message if you don't have an idea in the first place, if you don't have a message to communicate in the first place. So it starts all with a good idea to communicate, then you will find a way to communicate this idea. And please define the target audience. That will be very helpful so that when you write, you will keep the reader in the mind. Write a lot of drafts. That's very important. Nobody publishes something they write from the first time. Nobody, including the most professional writers. So just write a lot of drafts, draft and draft and draft. Trees will not die from using Word files nowadays. It's okay. And think before writing, but when writing, just draft. When writing, don't think too much. Because a good writer is actually a good editor. Later on, you will edit, but don't restrict yourself when you write. Think about that before write. When you sit and write, just keep your means uh, keep yourself free of the restrictions of the self-monitoring. Now it's not the time. Later on, you can edit and revise and review. Keywords to look for whenever you write is this: clarity, simplicity, and brevity. So it should be clear as much as possible, simple and short as much as possible, Short means brevity, brief as much as possible. And finally, remember that writing is a profession. So you are a craftsman. You are a researcher. Part of your job is to write. So if you consider yourself a writer, you are a craftsman, and every craftsman has and knows his or her own tools. So please know your tools as a writer. And this most probably will refer back to the language. Learn the language. Most of us, I think all of us here, they are not native speakers of English. So this is at least the second language of us. So we have to pay more attention. We have to, we have to do more actually to reach a level of writing that is okay and that will uh, help us in penetrating the art in the publication venues. So for the English language, you can refer to many, of course, resources. But generally, for writing well, especially professionally, including in academia, I refer you to some few resources. These are good books, and most of these books, at least two of them are very short. One is very famous, The Style. Second one is a little bit longer on writing well. And the last one from some researcher uh, is about how to write a lot. So please, you can just look these titles up later on. Learn the grammar. It's very important. Pay attention to the spelling of words. That's also very important. I know this looks like very boring and very technical aspects, but it's very important really. This is the style. This is the aspect of the style, aspect of the presentation. That include the spelling and punctuation and etc. And also learn enough vocabulary because it will help you. After you learn enough vocabulary, again, as I said before, use the simplest ones. And then if you, when I say learn the language, I don't mean you have to be a Shakespeare. You just take only as much as needed and no more. Okay, final words. These are hopefully the last slide. Yes, these. So just remember a few points actually. So we are still 10 minutes away from the end. So I think I have time to remind you of final points. First of all, remember this. This is very important. So please pay attention to this. Whatever you send to Google Scholar now, whatever you write now, whatever you publish now, most probably, unless some apocalypse or something happened to this world, most probably it will remain there forever. So think about this. What will your students, your employers, your colleagues, your friends, your family, whatever, fill the gap here. What will they think of you in 5, 10, 15, 20 years or more? So this will be there forever. So somebody who looks you up later on in the future, they want to know how good you are, for example. What's your heritage? So probably they will refer to all of your writing. So please consider this whenever you write some new piece of paper. And remember that citations follow superior works, but inferior works follow the citations. So that's one aspect to reflect on more. Actually, this sentence, this line only, it deserves a whole session by itself because it refers back uh, to the dilemma of citations and this problem of measurements. You know, usually we start with the system we want to improve. So you know that any improvement, you cannot improve anything without measuring it. You cannot improve anything you cannot measure. So we start measuring things and we put measures, some measures to measure the system we want to improve. Then somehow we focus more on the measurements, on the measures, and we forget the initial, the original system. So the measurements by themselves and the measures by themselves, they become a complete, sometimes it becomes an industry by itself. And we suffer from this now, but I will not talk more about that. But just remember this line. If you are good, citations will follow you. And please don't follow citations. And remember that one complete, solid article is more useful to the humanity and to the science, the progress of science, than a whole series of shallow salami slice articles. Salami slice is a term used for dividing a single work into multiple episodes. multiple papers. Each of them is shallow, valueless really, but it increases the quantity of papers. So this is just some tactic followed by some researchers, which harms actually the progress of science. And try to volunteer to review other papers that's useful for your writing, other than your research. And finally, if you don't use a key, it rusts. And if you don't practice a skill, you lose it. So that's to say, please write a lot. Practice writing, write and write and write, because your writing skill, your writing muscles, if you don't use them, uh, they will rust, they will get rusty, and probably you will lose a skill if you are not using it continuously. So that's my final word. Please practice writing as much as possible. And I hope you got something out of this short talk, short sharing session. So now I think it's time for any question and answer or any additions or any comments. So please feel free to add anything. Thank you.
Doctor, you said you have examples that you want to show. Maybe you can
Okay,
show some
I
examples.
actually I prefer, yeah, I prefer to receive some questions.
I do have a
Probably,
question.
yeah,
Um,
please ask question. Examples, actually, I will prefer to leave that for other people. Just refer to good papers in your field, with a whole lot of citations. Probably you will find the points I was talking about. I don't want to restrict your imagination to my samples, but if necessary, we can show some. But just let's us clear if there is anything else anybody can wants to add. Did you have any question, Ahmed, or any addition?
okay. For the related works section,
Okay.
so do you have any tips? How do you extract the information out of a particular paper, and how do you select the value of the papers? What can you
Okay.
write? Yeah, if you have a
O-
sample something.
Okay. This is a big question actually, and really we can fit a whole session talking about this. But just I will mention a couple of things. First about the selection, then about how to extract. So some advice, just a couple of advice. First of all, it's very important, extremely important. I cannot emphasize this enough, to select the good papers only. So whenever you are starting your literature review, you will find a lot uh, that has been written in anything nowadays. So it's crucial. Actually, it's crucial more than you think, that you don't select any work, anything. So, for example, you'll find a lot of works nowadays produced by students. This is very common. Actually, the works that are produced by students are much more than the works are produced by good researchers. So be selective. And how do you know that? There are many indicators. There are many ways, but I will just mention few signals. First of all, whenever you refer to, first of all, one way is just to restrict yourself. This is a restriction. Restrict yourself to the just respected sources, means the most prestigious databases. So, for example, usually when you search for academic articles, usually you will search for them using some kind of search engines, which are academic search engines. And most probably, this engine will refer back to few databases. And these databases, sometimes we call them citation services, or citation indexes. So, for example, um, one search engine um, is based on all publications by IEEE. Just an example. So IEEE provide offers a website called IEEE Explore. This is an interface, provides you with a search engine, so that will search in their database. So all the publications of IEEE. It's not necessary that all IEEE publications, unfortunately, nowadays are good. But this is one restriction you can put. So this is just one restriction. Another thing, you search, for example, in Science Direct. So this will refer to the publications by Elsevier. Again, it's not a guarantee that everything will be good, but this is just another layer of restriction. Or you search in Springer Link, or for example, Wiley database, Wiley search engine, and etc. But there is another way. If you don't want to make restrictions, especially now restrictions are less useful than in the previous days. So, for example, if you search for WOS, Web of Science public means index journals, it will be very few, very limiting, very restrictive. So what I prefer to do is just to make it open first, and I myself refer to Google Scholar. Google Scholar is wide open. There are no restrictions of any kind. So the search engine of Google Scholar is actually not restricted to any publisher. It's not tied to any publisher. It's not like Science Direct for Elsevier, or IEEE Explore for IEEE, or Springer Link for Springer publications. No, it's open for all publishers and every kind of resource. But what I will do, I will notice few signals. First of all, I will notice the journal. So if I know that this journal is a top tier journal, this is one signal. This is just one signal. Maybe I don't know that. Maybe you don't know. But many people with time, they learn about the most prestigious, the top tier journals in their field. You should know that by with time, of course. You should know that. Usually in one field there will be one, two, three, four, five journals which are respected, generally respected by the researchers in that field. So if you find some article in that journal, this is one signal, good indicator. Another thing, in Google Scholar, let me share with you. You search for the citations. So for example, okay, let me search for anything. Condition monitoring using machine learning. Okay, I will search for this, cited by. So other than the source, the journal itself, if I know about the journal. Second thing, the cited by. How many people cited this work? You will find works that are cited by, for example, only, for example, 11, for example. This is since 2020. But you might find others, maybe from 2019, cited by 300. This is most probably a good paper if it is cited by so many people. Another signal is, this is very important. I don't know why many people ignore this, but actually I refer to this first, really. My personal favorite is to use that. Usually I just click on the author name, first, second, third authors, all the time. I see who is that. Who is that? Is that a guy coming from a good university? Usually you will find university here, or in this case, it's a company. Is this guy have a good record of works in the same field? How about his H-index? H-index is not always a good indicator, but at least H-index will reflect, especially if his works are focused on in this field. So that's a good indicator. Usually I will click on whatever accounts available on the list of authors, always. So I will see what is his university or her university, which country, which universities is sometimes it's important about university, not about the country, about what company or what university, and what works he is known for, how many citations usually they get. Some authors, for example, you will follow some author. Let me just select. Sometimes you will follow an author, just arbitrary, I am selecting. You will find that many of their works, you see, they are not cited. You see, many are not cited, even if they are since many years ago. This is not a good indication. But if I look for an author, like, let me look for example, this author, the first one, you find although they have very few works, but a good indication is that most of their papers are cited somehow. So that's a good indication. And also the titles, are they focused on the same field? This means the same field of the paper, of the title itself. That will be good indicator. So the authors, the journal, the citations. This is now I am ignoring where this is. So I'm ignoring, I didn't restrict myself to the database. I didn't go to IEEE Explore only or Science Direct only, etc. I just use Google Scholar, but I use my, also with experience, you will get a sense. Sometimes even from the title, you can have a guess of the quality of the paper. Okay, so this is about the selection. And another thing, when you read the articles, of course, you have to collect enough articles about your topic. When you read the articles, just follow this advice here. I talked about this here. Don't forget this one. Uh, Always hold a pen and paper whenever you read. So always, whenever you read papers, try to highlight if you are using a PDF or digital form, or just to jot down, you can write down, you can copy some of the highlights from the paper onto your notebook. This is very important. Why? Because when you read, sometimes we are in a rush just to finish. We just count the papers. I mean, we count the pages. We want to finish. No, don't finish fast. Whenever you find some idea, write it down. Whenever you find something that deserves attention, highlight it, or just draw a line below it. If you have a question while you are reading, just write it down, uh, and then read the next, then the next, then the next. Later on, when you finish, of course, you will have forgot then most of this, of course. But then you will refer to your notes. You will refer to this little bank of comments and notes and questions and thoughts and highlights and lines, and you will find a wealthy resource. So you will find everything you need to fill maybe two papers because just reorganize them and reorder them. So this is just a couple of very quick points on. Oh, I took too much time. Sorry. About how to select and then how to extract. I will stop here because I
Okay.
have taken too much
Razin
time.
has one question in the
Yeah, yeah,
chat.
please go ahead. Oh,
Uh,
sorry. There is also another question.
in the chat.
Rajan, where is? Okay, in the chat. So just want to ask how to compile a series of papers literature review. Yeah, yeah. Okay, this is a talk by itself. This is a discussion for a whole session. But again, the main theme here, if you want to compile papers for a literature review, it's a literature review. So I have a mechanism, very quick mechanism. But first, let's agree. What you will select related to your topic, the title of the literature review, it will be relevant and important. Again, this is, you remember this? I'm not sure where I included that, but they should be most important and most relevant. This is one thing. So it should be relevant to your title of the review, your topic, and it should be important. Second, you have to remember my advice for Ahmed just now. You select the best papers, okay? But still, you will find a lot, sometimes hundreds. It's okay. You select the hundreds. Then I advise you to do I will give you a quick advice, but of course, we can elaborate on this more, maybe in another session about how to write a review paper. So try to draw a very rough taxonomy, a very rough taxonomy. Taxonomy means when you do your first search, you have selected good papers. You have seen a lot of titles. Probably you have seen few patterns and some kind of repetitive themes. For example, within the same topic, maybe you notice that, oh, many uh, papers talk about this technique in that topic. Many papers talk about they are survey, for example. Many papers they argue for this point. So you notice some pattern, you notice something. So please remember those themes and those patterns. You make a rough taxonomy, like a classification of all the literature that is in this field, in this topic, and then draw a rough taxonomy. Maybe you will have 4 or 5 categories. Then you start um, selecting journal articles and classifying each of them under one of these main rough taxonomy, rough categories. So then with time, you will start looking for, oh, I recognize this article is for this under this category, this article under this type, this article under this type. Then you continue doing this, and most probably you will refine your category, your categories. You will refine your taxonomy with time. It's okay. You refine it. You uh, 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 maybe delete some category, or maybe you add subcategories. Then at the end, you will keep looking for papers until you feel that, okay, you got already a balanced number of papers under each category. If you have something like that, then you have a good taxonomy of the literature. This is a best thing to do if you have a review paper. One of the main contribution of review papers is that you introduce a taxonomy. Taxonomy means some classification of the works in this field. Then you just have to you have to judge what is the quality of each. You just select the best, the most important, and the most relevant. But be complete. Be complete. And if you have some categories with less papers, you can merge categories together, or you can delete some categories, or you can refine some categories. Anyway, I will stop here. I hope that you got some idea, but we can elaborate on this in another time. So sorry, Razin. I think I have cut this off, but I hope that you get some pointer, and maybe later on we can elaborate on this more. Because I see one raised hand. So
Yeah,
Collins.
hello.
Yeah, yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, hello. Good evening, Doc.
Good evening. Yeah.
Yeah, I have two confusions. Okay. Number one is that you made mention of citations. So, so in your own opinion, do you think that papers published in an open source have the advantage over
Okay.
papers? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand. Yes, yes. The
Okay.
second question.
And my second confusion is that you made mention of at least when you intend to write a paper, you should know the journal, you should have that particular journal you want to publish. So I know I've heard about that in the past, but so do you think is I don't know. Let me put it this way: is a normal regular advice to put your eggs in one basket, because most of the times those journal that you intend or that you are writing for, most of the times they might reject. So it might, at the end of the day, it might bring some confusion. Or do you think as a beginner it's good to write it in a general pattern, then you can later narrow it down to that particular journal?
Okay. Okay. That's your question. Okay. Thank you very much. I got it. Thank you. So good questions actually. So I start with the first one, just to reiterate your question so that everybody got the question, and probably you can correct me if I am wrong. So the first one is about citations. Yeah. So for the open source, they call it the open access journals in the literature. So of course, yeah, I cannot deny that. Of course, because the point is, it's obvious. Actually, this is an obvious argument. Nobody can argue too much with that. That's one of the selling points, main selling points that the open access industry built on. So they built on this fact that whenever you have an article, okay, that is accessible to as many as possible, then most probably your opportunity, your chance of getting more citations is more. That argument cannot be denied, really, because you face it yourself. Whenever you look up for papers because you want to do some literature review for a topic, and then you search for papers. If you couldn't have an access to the full text of a journal paper or a conference paper, some article, if you couldn't have an access to that, most probably you will not be able to judge, you will not be able to refer to that article, and maybe you will exclude that altogether from your list of references. So that cannot be denied. So that's very unfortunate. But how the ecosystem is assuming something, assuming that most of the researchers who are working in academia, they will get access to most of the articles, the most, not all, cannot be, but the most, through their institutions. So the business of publishing is built on subscription model. Subscription model is a traditional model. This used to be the case in the old days for every journal. So your institution, the government, the university, the organization, it will subscribe to the journals and it will provide access to their authors. So anybody publishing in those journals will get through to the rest of the authors in the other universities, which are assuming that experts in the same field. Of course, nowadays we have so many universities, so many organizations. Some of them are not rich enough to subscribe in every available publishing service, publishing database. That's why this model is a little bit broken, and hence the industry of open access came about. So now they are moving the financial burdens, they are moving the cost from the institute, uh, at least directly, to the author. Sometimes it is to the institute indirectly, but the author is the main actually victim of this new model. So if you want more access, why do you want more access? Actually, very few researchers will just want genuinely to disseminate the knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Most of the authors who are careful about, who are keen to publish in open access, they care about the citations. They want their work to be accessible to as many researchers as possible, so they can gain citations in return. So that's the answer for the question. The short answer is yes. It matters actually. If you can publish in open access journals, it matters with respect to citations. I would say this should not be the driving force about publishing in a certain journal, because there is more weight. It's not only about open access. Means if I am a good researcher, um, you will benefit from my citations, okay? But I am, as a good researcher, not necessarily I will just look for open access journals. My number one sources will be the good journals in my field. So whatever those journals are, closed access or open access, I will refer to them first because I'm a good researcher. And if you look for good researchers because you will benefit from their citations more, then that will be your most important priority. Just look for the most prestigious, most important journals in every field, because most of the good researchers will refer to those first. Second, if you don't have access to this or you couldn't penetrate this, then you move into the open access action if you have the financial resources. Then next, if you couldn't afford this, then you move into the cheaper, the most affordable closed access journals. So unfortunately, we have to follow this order nowadays. But first, the most top tier journals in your field. This is the most important resource for any good researchers. And that leads me to the second question about the target. You see, I will put it like that. You have you have a point. Of course, you have a point. I understand. But you see, if you don't restrict yourself to any target journal, so you will write assuming free text, free style, free format. Eventually, at some point, when your paper is accepted, you will have to reformat your paper to accommodate the requirements of that journal that accepted your work. So at some point or another, you will have to reformat. We have to agree on that. So now my question is, my point is, why don't you do this twice? So you just add this burden another twice. Actually, it will be less burden later on if you have some formatting from the start, from the front up, because most of the formatting is not very far away between a journal and another, not very far away. So although you have a risk of not being accepted in some journal, but that should be the goal of any good person, even outside publication. If you don't have if your bar is not high enough, if you don't aim for the top, you won't reach the top at all. So if you don't have this mindset and conceptual idea of just publishing in these top journals at any point, of course, if you have good publishable, I'm talking about good publishable work. If you don't aim for that, probably you will not get there anytime soon. So try to aim for that. Format it once. If it is rejected, you will just reformat. It will be much easier to reformat than to format it from the scratch, and you will have to format it anyway. So most probably you will move into 2 or 3 journals, and you will have to reformat from now or then. So that will just add a minimal addition, extra effort, where you just upfront you format it just as per the requirement. Another thing is that you think it of like that. If you want to publish in a journal, okay, if you want to publish in a journal, even if you have um, um, little chance of publishing, one of the points that um, helps you, that actually increases your chances of publishing in that journal, is to follow the requirements up front. So actually, if you keep the audience of that journal in your mind, so even your language will differ. It's not only about the formatting. even your way of writing, even your sections, sometimes you will follow the same proven method followed by other research in that journal. So probably now you are increasing the chance. If you don't do that, you are indirectly reducing your chance of getting penetrating that journal. So I mean, this is not for certain. This is not like it's agreed by everybody. So a few years ago I didn't believe in that. Few years ago I was saying that, you know I should write some manuscript and then the publication venue follows. But later on, when I see this advice over and over and over, and I think about it, I think, yeah, it makes a point. It makes a point to just first decide on a target, because I will increase my chances of publishing in that target, and the extra burden is not that much. I will just reformat it once, and later on I can modify the formatting. But most probably, if my style is good for that top journal, it will also be good for the less, less quality journals. So that's my just opinion about that. I hope you don't disagree too much, but but of course, uh, you can share your ideas, of course. Sorry. Okay, Colin. So I hope that you don't disagree, but if you disagree, it's okay as well. Is that okay, Collins?
No, I'm not. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just trying to air my confusion.
Okay, okay. I hope you get something from my answer, but
Yeah, thanks for your
those
input.
are my thoughts.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, welcome. Oh, I see that we took quite a time. I underestimated actually the time for the question and answer. So because previously we had no questions, so I assume this will be the same. So anyway, is there anybody else with any addition? Okay, guys, is that all?
Yeah, I think there's no more question.
Okay, so thank you very much for attending the session and paying attention and bearing with me until this point. Actually, it is a little bit late. Uh, and I hope to see you also in our next session. So every month, I just remind everyone here that in the energy sphere, we have 2 sessions per month. Okay, one is a technical in nature. So actually, we have tomorrow one of these sessions. It will be about some technical topic, and the other session in the month is about this general concerns of research and writing and learning. And last month we talked about metrics of publication, and today we just have some, it should be just a coffee hour discussion. So it is just sharing session. It's not very technical. It's not lengthy by design. It's not lengthy discussion. So it's just sharing session. And also next month, inshallah, we'll have the same. There will be another topic. So we will decide on the topic, but it will be about either doing the process, learning tips about the learning process itself. Probably some point we'll have some talk about the publication types, because I see interest in writing review. Maybe we talk about review articles. We talk about how to learn. We talk about how to do the research process itself. So it will be general. So it applies to everybody. But the technical talks will be more focused on some particular topics. So if you are interested, by the way, tomorrow we have a talk about using deep learning for time series classification. So it's not important for everyone, but just in case you are interested. So at the end, I thank everyone, and I hope to see you in the next month in our future sessions. And that's from our side in the Fair. We wish you a good week and then a weekend. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, guys. See
So,
you. Assalamu alaikum, and also good afternoon. So now we will end the meeting.